Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Greg Cochran, and I am Managing Director at Pilko and Associates. I'm joined today by Tony Barletta. Tony is with us from his office in Portugal, and he's going to be talking today about a variety of topics around managing major capital projects, how you interface with the board, how the project management team works together, all the things they're measuring. But before we get into those details, Tony, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, Greg, good morning and thank you. By way of introduction, my name's Tony Barletta. I'm a project management professional who's been in the industry for over 35 years. Just in case you're trying to peg my accent, I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa. I worked for ExxonMobil for close on 30 years on capital projects, both in the upstream and downstream, and worked as a project manager on a number of those projects, both at the front end and execution stage of the project. After leaving ExxonMobil, I joined HMEL as project director on a world-class cracker project with derivative units in Bathinda, India, and successfully took that project to mechanical completion, and that project is being commissioned as we speak.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. I've always been impressed with your geographic scope. I mean, you've been all over the world doing the things that you just mentioned. And so I know that is going to come into some of the conversation today. Well, let's get started. The issue that we're talking about today is, how do you keep that project out of the ditch, or how do you recognize that it's going in the ditch? But I think it's bigger than that, right? It's also the interface between you as the project management team leader, the board of directors, what questions they should be asking. So give us some introduction into the subject, Tony.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting discussion to me because it's quite non-traditional. I think we're flipping the script here a little bit and starting to look at this from a board or CEO perspective. When the board or the CEO interacts with that PMT for the very first time, are they able to maybe flush out some impending issues that are really developing within the PMT? And why do we say this? Because, PMTs by nature are close to the issues. PMTs are really skilled at getting their hands around issues and presenting their version of what the world should look like to the board. And so what we've done here is I've really sat down and thought about maybe 5 key areas that the board could be looking at, the types of questions and metrics that the board could be touching on to maybe flush out some issues or get the PMT to look at a bit differently. And I've broken those down into safety, into quality, into schedule, into procurement, and into cost.
You said something in our conversation, Tony, earlier that still resonates with me, and that is you need to let the PMT manage the project, okay? That they, like yourself, well-versed in global project execution, how to do this thing, so you know what you're doing. What you don't want to do is have the board take the controls away from the PMT. I don't know if that's even
absolutely. I mean, you're looking for that healthy dynamic between the PMT and the board. And that healthy dynamic, of course, is the board not micromanaging the PMT, but it also has a flip side to the discussion in that the PMT has to be transparent with the issues as they evolve.
Good point. Excellent point. Well, go down your list. I know you started with safety. So what's the key safety question, or how do I stay on top of safety?
Yeah, so on the safety issue, I think, of course, the traditional discussion between the board and the PMT would be the PMT coming to the board, presenting their leading and lagging indicators. And if there has been an LTI, of course, there would be a deep dive discussion into that LTI and all the metrics that were being put in place to make sure that never happened again. Now that we're looking at maybe impending issues, from a board perspective, I think there's a really healthy discussion on asking the PMT to go back and what I would call mine some of the near misses, mine some of the potential near misses, and go and look for some of those indicators that have the potential for hurt. And what I mean is which subset of near misses, which subset of high potentials can really cause life-altering events, fatalities, or multiple fatalities, and get the PMT to develop some strategies and plans to address those high potential hurt incidents. And that's a very powerful tool. On the last project I did in Bathinda in India, we combined that hurt profile along with LPIs, and on a 200 million man-hour plus project had a world-class safety record just by being very proactive with the way we manage safety.
Excellent questions. And I'm sure, as the data begins to come out, that may take you down a variety of different trails. But I love the concept of, hey, here's really one of the key core areas to focus on. It's a leading indicator, as you said multiple times. And so that's a good way to start. Quality, is that next on your list?
That is next on my list, Greg. So quality, again, the traditional discussion would be the PMT maybe presenting the well reject rates, discussing NCRs. I, from a board perspective, would really challenge the team to take the quality discussion in a different direction, because at the end of the day, what happens if quality is badly done on a project? It really starts to show up in pre-commissioning and commissioning. So, of course, I'm assuming that there are KPIs in place and the PMT is managing those KPIs, but I would challenge the PMT to make sure that we had preservation programs included in those KPIs. And also having a look at what I would call the clean build program. By clean build, I would mean that the piping that comes into the construction site is clearly laid on dunnage, that their end caps, that valves are properly protected, that maybe when line pipe is joined, it's all the dirt is blown out, especially with projects in the Middle East. And you can even take this a step further, that when you are hydro testing, you go straight into a gravity flush to get rid of most of the dirt out of the system.
You just struck a nerve with me. I remember we were very compartmentalized in the project that we were working on. And so they had phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that type of thing. And there was an epiphany along the way of, hey, we need to bring some of the commissioning and startup processes into, the construction element, because to your point, there's overlap there, first of all. Plus, we're going to be much better off in commissioning and startup if we do these things up front.
Absolutely. That clean build process is incredibly powerful at the back end. And the way that's managed, of course, is just by doing surveys and audits in the field. And you can certainly roll those findings from those audits into the KPI just to see how well you're doing. And preservation is another great example. If you're doing the preservation well, of course, that you don't land up with any problems during pre-commissioning or commissioning.
The notorious, in my opinion, the notorious topic is next, and that's how you manage the milestones and the schedule. So talk to me about that.
That's a great topic. We're trying to. I'm trying to just frame the discussion around, and I really feel quite strongly about this. The level of influence that maybe the board or the CEO has is in maybe those first or second meetings where you're interacting with the PMT. Once you're into the steep part of the curve, of course, if there's an issue that is showing up where you've maybe missed a number of milestones or you've come off the curve and you're in the ditch, quite frankly, it's almost impossible to get back on schedule. So anything you can do on the flat part of the curve before you're in the steep slope, and any of these really deep questions or searching questions that the PMT or board can come up with is really going to be beneficial to everyone on the project. So a great example may be on the front end of the schedule. Let's say the project management team has come off the curve a little bit. They're grappling with those issues. They're trying to get their hand around it, and they may not be totally transparent with the board at that stage. From a board perspective, I would kind of flip the script a little bit, because when you put the P85 schedule together, you've put that schedule basis memorandum together, the team has identified the risks for that schedule. From a board's perspective, I would say, okay, let's go and have a discussion and look at the risks. Of course, those risks would have been put in place, the mitigating effects would have been there, and I would see how well the project is managing those risks, and do they have those risks in front of them on a daily basis. A good example of that would be also looking for new risks that enter the scenario. For example, when COVID came along, that threw a spanner in the works with everyone, and every project out there had to go and develop a brand new set of SOPs on how to operate. So looking at the risks, looking to see if there's any emerging risks that come across, and then essentially trying to help the PMT develop some plans and processes to mitigate the issues that are coming down the pipeline.
Excellent. Now, again, every time you talk about the certain elements of what your subject matter here, I can remember being in those rooms and those discussions in my career. I think next is procurement, and how well are we doing on that?
Yeah, again, procurement, you would expect, a good PMT to have a great handle on their procurement. They would have identified their long lead items when they put their schedules together. So the question really is just testing the PMT to see, do they need any help? And I use the word help. Do they need any help with some of the vendor inspection programs that are being run? Do they need any help with expediting? And at the end of the day, do they need the PMT to go and elevate issues up at a sponsor level? Does the PMT need the board to elevate any issues at a sponsor level? So it's more around what help can the board give the PMT. And I think it's comforting to the PMT to know that the board has that attitude, that we're there to help you with any of those emerging issues.
Yeah, I think to your point, knowing that help is available up front before you find yourself going into the ditch is really good, right? So take advantage of that help early and often.
Yeah. And then the last issue really is fairly simple. It's cost issue. When the HAZOP was finally frozen, when the HAZOP was completed and the scope of work was finally frozen, you would have expected the project to have a good management of change process in place. And of course, there's going to be scope growth on these projects, but how well is it managed and how well is it rolled back into both the cost and the schedule? So again, a small discussion just to test the PMT to see how effectively that process is being managed is absolutely important. You could get into a discussion and see, hang on a minute, there's some gaps in the way things are being managed. And then the earlier you pick that up, the better. So those are the 5 key topics that I would touch on. Now, I'm on all these 5 areas that I've touched on, I'm making a key base assumption here, right? I'm assuming we have a strong project management team. I'm assuming that all the framework up front in these projects is well put together, that the project objectives and strategies are well defined, that the contracting strategies and work breakdown structures are well put together. The contractors and subcontractors the contractors and subcontractors that we have in place are really the best teams that we can manage, and so I have to say that we have to say everything up front is working, because that could certainly be the recipe for some of the issues that show up in the projects.
Tony, we've talked a lot, or you've talked a lot about transparency, and you've talked about at least the way I hear it, there's a key relationship building between the PMT, obviously, and the board, and that relationship's got to be robust. But have you ever seen it where, I don't know, it almost gets adversarial? They're almost competing. Talk to me about that dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy dynamic in some regards, especially early on in the project. Of course, when PMTs are trying to gain control of early issues, they're the experts of those issues. And oftentimes, the makeup on the board, those members are not the subject matter experts, right? So that dynamic is a healthy dynamic. I think the message that the board can give is make sure that the project is given enough time to get their hands around issues and move through, I guess, the key gates in a successful way. A good example of this, I believe, would be, let's say, in engineering. If a project is a little bit off the curve, there may be an urgency to move from engineering into construction. I think the PMT has an onus to keep the project PMT grounded, make sure that all their deliverables are coming out in the right sequence, because I've seen on a number of projects, if that doesn't happen, there are massive impacts to mechanical, electrical, and instrumentation work. And honestly, I've seen projects with civil work in 80% or 90% of construction. So it's absolutely important that those deliverables come out in the right sequence. If that dynamic is not working well and the PMTs may be pushing too hard, the board does have the luxury of maybe doing an independent project review and making sure that that project really is ready to move through the gate. And that can be from construction into, from engineering into construction, or from construction into pre-commissioning and commissioning.
I like that. I like that a lot, where you should step back, take a deep breath. Let's understand what we're doing here before we go forward. Anything else that you can think of that you want to, I haven't asked you about, you'd like to cover?
I think this discussion today has all been about influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
The influence that the CEO and the board has is really at those first or second meetings, being able to ask the right questions of the PMT, or maybe put some metrics in place and have that dialogue with the PMT early, okay? Board members by nature and the makeup of the boards are probably not project management professionals. Maybe they are manufacturing professionals or business professionals. So I'm hoping this discussion would certainly resonate with boards and CEOs and go, hey, these are the kind of questions I should be asking early on. And as we've said, early in this discussion today, once you're off the curve, you're in the ditch, and then you're into an absolute different discussion about how do I re-baseline schedules, and cost assurance and schedule assurance, which is really where you don't want to be. So the level of influence in these first or second meetings, I think, can be quite huge. And if you follow maybe some of these guidelines that we've discussed today, I believe boards can be a lot more effective in some of the early communications they have with the PMT.
Yeah, well said, Tony. Thank you so much. The wisdom that you've gained over the many years of doing this shows very, very specifically. If you'd like to know more about what Tony was talking about today, don't hesitate to reach out to us at pilko.com and we'll respond immediately. We hope that you and your family are doing well and staying safe. Have a great day.